All right, so today we're diving deep into how videos get discovered online, VOD and all that.
Uh-huh.
And this thing called MRSS, have you heard of it?
Oh, yeah, MRSS. It's like the secret sauce of video discovery.
Okay, so tell me more. What is MRSS?
Well, MRSS stands for Media Really Simple Syndication,
Okay.
and it's basically a way to give search engines all the important information about your video
Hmm.
so they can understand it and rank it properly. It's like SEO, but for video.
So it's all about helping my videos get seen by the right people.
Exactly. You want to make sure your content isn't getting lost in the vast sea of videos out there.
Right, because what's the point of creating amazing content if nobody can find it?
Exactly.
Okay, so can you break it down for me? How does MRSS actually work?
Sure. Think of it like a library card catalog for your videos.
Okay.
You know how a card catalog has all the information about a book? Like
Yeah.
the title, author, subject?
Right.
Well, MRSS does the same thing for your videos. It provides all the essential details, like the title description, keywords, category, all that good stuff. And this helps search engines understand what your video is about and who might be interested in watching it.
So it's kind of like giving search engines a detailed map of my video,
That's a great analogy.
so they can easily find it and connect it with the right viewers.
Exactly.
Now, you mentioned keywords. Can you talk a bit more about how those work with MRSS?
Sure. So keywords are basically the terms that people use when they're searching for something online.
Right.
And with MRSS, you can include specific keywords that are relevant to your video. Let's say you have a video about baking a chocolate cake.
Okay.
You might include keywords like chocolate cake recipe, baking tutorial dessert ideas, things like that.
Got it.
And when someone searches for those terms on Google or YouTube, your video is more likely to show up in the results.
So it's all about making my videos searchable and discoverable.
Exactly.
Interesting. Now, I've heard of other content delivery solutions like HLS and MPEG-.
Yeah.
How does MRSS compare to those?
Good question. So HLS and MPEG- are more focused on the technical side of video streaming.
Making sure the video plays smoothly and efficiently across different devices and platforms.
Right, so they're like the delivery trucks getting the video to its destination.
Exactly.
But what about MRSS? What's its role in all of this?
MRSS is like the GPS system for those delivery trucks.
I like that.
It makes sure the video gets delivered to the right audience, the people who are actually interested in watching it.
So MRSS is all about visibility, while those other solutions are about performance.
You got
That's
it.
a helpful distinction. Okay, so it sounds like MRSS is a pretty important tool for anyone who's serious about getting their videos seen online.
Absolutely. It's one of the most effective ways to boost your video's discoverability and reach a wider audience.
Now I'm curious about the best practices for implementing MRSS. Where do I even begin?
Well, the first step is to create what's called an MRSS feed.
Okay.
It's basically a file that contains all the metadata about your video, like the title, description, keywords, and so on.
So like a detailed profile for my video. Exactly. And this feed is what you submit to search engines and other platforms so they can understand and index your content.
That makes sense. So what kind of information should I include in this MRSS feed?
Well, you want to make sure you include all the essentials, a catchy title that accurately reflects the content of your video,
Right.
a clear and concise description that provides more context,
Uh-huh.
relevant keywords that people are likely to search for,
Right.
and of course, the category that your video belongs to.
Okay, so it's all about giving search engines as much information as possible so they can properly categorize and rank my video.
Precisely. And the more detailed and accurate your MRSS feed is, the better your chances of getting your video seen by the right people.
This is all starting to make a lot of sense.
Mm.
Now, I'm curious about how MRSS actually works in the real world. Can you give me some examples of platforms that use it?
Oh yeah, tons of platforms use MRSS behind the scenes, YouTube, Vimeo, Brightcove.
Really?
Even social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter use it to some extent.
Wow. So it's pretty widespread.
It's everywhere. And it's only becoming more important as video content continues to grow in popularity.
That's incredible. I had no idea MRSS played such a big role in video discoverability.
Yeah, it's kind of the unsung hero of the online video world. But it's definitely something that every content creator should be aware of.
Okay, so let's say I'm sold on MRSS. But I have to admit, I'm a bit intimidated by all this. It sounds like there's a lot that can go wrong.
Yeah.
What are some common challenges people face with MRSS?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is simply managing all that metadata.
Right. Especially if you have a lot of videos.
Exactly. It can be a lot to keep track of, and you need to make sure your MRSS feed is always up to date so that your videos are properly indexed.
Yeah, I can see how that could be a hassle. And what about formatting? there any specific guidelines I need to follow?
Oh, yeah. Each platform has its own specific requirements for formatting your MRSS feed.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Not really. But there are online validators you can use to check your feed and make sure it's formatted correctly.
Okay, so validation is key. And what about those potential pitfalls you mentioned earlier? Any tips for avoiding them?
Well, one common mistake is stuffing your MRSS feed with too many keywords.
Hmm, interesting.
It might seem like a good idea to include as many keywords as possible, but it can actually backfire. Search
Yeah.
engines can see this as spammy, and it could actually hurt your ranking.
So it's about being strategic with my keywords.
Exactly. Choose a few relevant keywords that accurately describe your video and use them naturally in your title description and tags.
Okay, so it's not just about quantity, but quality.
Exactly. And another common mistake is neglecting to update your MRSS feed regularly.
Oh, right.
You need to make sure your feed reflects any changes you make to your video. Like if you
Yeah.
update the title or description, you need to update your MRSS feed as well.
Got it. So it's an ongoing process.
It is, but it's definitely worth the effort. A well-crafted and up-to-date MRSS feed can make a huge difference in how easily your videos are discovered online.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. I think I have a much better understanding of what MRSS is and how it works.
Good.
But now I'm curious to dive a little deeper into some more advanced MRSS strategies.
Sure.
So let's move on to the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good. Okay, so you mentioned advanced strategies. Where do you want to start?
Well, we touched on categories earlier,
Uh-huh.
but I feel like
Yeah.
there's more to it than just picking the most obvious one, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Mm.
Choosing the right categories is super important. It can make a huge difference in how easily your videos get discovered.
Okay, so how do I choose the right categories? Then there's so many options.
Well, first, you got to think about your target audience. Who are you trying to reach with your videos?
Okay.
And what are they likely to be searching for? What categories would they be browsing?
Makes sense. So it's not just about picking a category that describes my video.
Right. It's about picking categories that your audience is actually using.
Okay, so for example,
For example, if you have a video about yoga, you wouldn't just want to put it under the broad category of health and fitness.
Right.
You might also want to consider subcategories like yoga for beginners or power yoga or restorative yoga.
So being more specific can really help narrow down the search and reach the right people.
Exactly. It's like putting your video on the right shelf in a bookstore. You want to make sure it's in the section where people who are interested in that topic are going to be looking.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about categories. Now what about keywords? Are there any special tricks for choosing the right ones?
Oh, yeah. Keyword research is a whole art form in itself. But one of the best tips I can give you is to use a mix of general and long-tail keywords.
What's the difference?
So general keywords are those broad terms that describe your video's overall topic, like yoga or cooking or travel.
Got it.
But long-tail keywords are more specific phrases that people might use when they're searching for something particular.
Okay, can you give me an example?
Sure. So if your video is about making homemade pasta, a general keyword might be pasta recipe, but a long-tail keyword might be something like how to make fresh fettuccine from scratch.
I see. So long-tail keywords are more targeted.
Exactly. And they're often less competitive, which means you have a better chance of ranking for them.
So by using a mix of both general and long-tail keywords.
You're casting a wider net and increasing your chances of showing up in different searches.
Okay, that makes sense. Now what about titles and descriptions? Any tips for making those really stand out?
Oh, yeah. You got to think of your titles and descriptions as your video's sales pitch.
Interesting.
You want to make them as compelling and attention-grabbing as possible.
So how do I do that?
Well, for titles, keep them concise and to the point, but also try to pique the viewer's curiosity.
Okay.
Use numbers or questions or power words to make them more clickable.
Like top 10 tips for making amazing pasta.
Exactly, something like that. And for descriptions, focus on highlighting the key benefits or takeaways that viewers will gain from watching your video.
So instead of just listing the topics I cover.
Right, instead of saying, this video is about making pasta, you could say, learn how to make delicious homemade pasta from scratch with this easy-to-follow recipe.
So it's about focusing on the value proposition.
Exactly. What's in it for the viewer? Why should they watch your video?
Makes sense. Now, I'm curious about managing all of this. We've talked about titles, descriptions, keywords, categories. It sounds like there's a lot to keep track of.
Yeah, it can be a bit overwhelming, especially if you have a large library of videos.
So any tips for staying organized?
Well, one of the best things you can do is create a standardized process for creating and updating your MRSS feeds.
Okay.
You might consider using a spreadsheet or a content management system to keep track of all your video metadata.
So having a system in place is key.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to automate. There are tools out there that can help you automatically generate and update your MRSS feeds.
That sounds like a lifesaver. Now let's talk about some of those potential pitfalls you mentioned earlier. What are some common mistakes people make with MRSS?
Well, one of the biggest mistakes is forgetting to validate your MRSS feed.
Validate. What does that mean?
It means making sure your feed is properly formatted and free of any errors.
Oh, okay.
You know, kind of like proofreading an important document before you send it out.
Got it. So how do I validate my MRSS feed?
There are online validators you can use, and most platforms also have their own specific guidelines for formatting MRSS.
So I need to do my research.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And another common mistake is keyword stuffing.
Keyword stuffing.
Yeah, it's when people try to cram as many keywords as possible into their titles and descriptions, thinking that it'll help them rank higher.
Right.
But it actually has the opposite effect. Search engines see this as spammy, and it can hurt your ranking.
So it's not about quantity, it's about quality.
Exactly. Choose a few relevant keywords and use them naturally. Don't try to force them in.
Okay. And are there any other common mistakes?
Well, another big one is forgetting to update your MRSS feeds regularly. You know, whenever you add a new video or make changes to an existing one.
Oh, right. So it's not a one-time thing.
Nope. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
You need to keep your MRSS feeds fresh and up to date if you want your videos to be discoverable.
Okay. So consistency is key.
Yeah.
Just like with any other aspect of online marketing.
Exactly. Now, we've been talking a lot about the technical side of MRSS, but I also want to touch on the creative side.
The creative side.
Yeah, because MRSS isn't just about feeding information to search engines.
Right.
It's also about connecting with viewers on a deeper level.
So how do we do that?
Well, think of your MRSS feed as an extension of your video story.
Okay.
Use your titles and descriptions to create intrigue and draw viewers in. You know, use evocative language, ask thought-provoking questions, maybe even incorporate some humor.
So it's about treating my MRSS feed as another opportunity to showcase my brand's personality and voice.
Exactly. Your MRSS feed is an extension of your brand, and it should reflect your unique style and tone.
That's a great point. So it's not just about data, it's about storytelling.
Exactly. And when you can combine the two, that's when you really start to see magic happen.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from basic best practices to more advanced strategies, and even some creative tips. Any final words of wisdom for our listeners before we move on to the last part of our deep dive?
Sure. Just remember that MRSS is a powerful tool, but it's not a magic bullet. It takes time, effort, and strategic approach to see real results. So be patient, be persistent, and don't be afraid to experiment.
Okay.
Track your results, analyze what's working, and adjust your strategy as needed. And most importantly, stay curious and keep learning.
Well said. All right, I think we're ready to move on to the final part of our deep dive,
Okay.
where we'll explore some real-world examples of MRSS in action.
Sounds good.
All right, so we've talked a lot about the technical side of MRSS, the feeds and keywords and all that.
Yeah.
But I want to see it in action.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us some real-world examples of how MRSS is being used effectively?
Absolutely. Let's think about that furniture restoration video again.
Yeah. The anti-trusser one.
Right. So you've uploaded it to YouTube and you've created a really solid MRSS feed.
Okay.
You've got keywords like antique restoration, DIY furniture, maybe even some specific styles like mid-century modern.
Got it. So how does that actually translate into views and engagement?
Well, imagine someone's on YouTube searching for how to refinish an antique dresser.
Uh-huh.
Because you've got those keywords in your MRSS feed, your video is more likely to pop up in their search results.
Okay. So it's like helping my video stand out from all the noise.
Exactly. It's giving it a boost in the algorithm, so it's seen by people who are actually looking for that kind of content.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So it's not just about getting on YouTube. It's about getting seen on YouTube.
Right. And it's not just YouTube either.
Yeah.
Think about educational content, online courses, things like that.
Okay.
If you're creating a course about coding,
Yeah.
you can use MRSS to make sure it's categorized correctly and tagged with all the relevant keywords.
Like web development or specific programming languages.
Exactly. So when someone's searching for a coding tutorial, your course is more likely to show up.
And that could be on your website or even on other platforms that aggregate courses.
Right. Exactly. So you're expanding your reach significantly.
Wow. So MRSS isn't limited to just YouTube then?
No, not at all. It can be used for all kinds of video content, news broadcasts, podcasts, corporate training videos, you name it.
So pretty much any platform that uses video can benefit from MRSS.
Exactly. It's a really versatile tool.
Okay, so this is all great, but how does our listener actually apply this to their video strategy?
Well, the first thing is to think about your goals. What are you trying to achieve with your videos? Are
Right.
you trying to increase brand awareness, drive traffic to your website, generate leads? Once you know your goals, you can start to think about how MRSS can help you get there.
So it all starts with a clear strategy.
Absolutely. And then you need to really understand your target audience. Who are you trying to reach? What are their interests? What are their pain points? Where do they hang out online?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's about knowing who you're talking to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you need to put all those practical tips we talked about into practice.
You mean like crafting compelling titles and descriptions?
Right. Choosing relevant keywords, making sure your feed is formatted correctly, all that good stuff.
So it's about bringing all those pieces together.
Exactly.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to touch on something you mentioned earlier about MRSS not being a magic bullet.
Uh-huh.
It takes time and effort to see results. So any final words of encouragement for our listeners?
Definitely remember that the world of online video is constantly changing. So be patient, be persistent, and don't be afraid to experiment. Track your results, see what's working, and adjust your strategy as needed.
So it's a learning process.
It is, but it's a really rewarding one when you start seeing those results.
Awesome. Well, I think we've covered just about everything there is to know about MRSS.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts before we sign off?
Just this. Never underestimate the power of making your video content discoverable. In today's digital world, it's not enough to just create great videos. You have to make sure they're seen by the right people. And MRSS can be your secret weapon in doing just that.
I love that. That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into MRSS. We hope you found it informative and inspiring. Until next time, keep creating, keep learning, and keep those videos coming.